Ever wondered what happens if a psychopath owned a pair of glasses and wore a white coat? These are hands down the most evil experiments in human history. Number 1. Unit 731. Unit 731. Just hearing the name sends chills down my spine, which I don't have. This experiment took mad scientists to a whole new level. So during World War II, the Japanese army conducted some of the most chilling experiments on live human subjects, which weren't your average science fair project. But before we get into the gruesomely juicy details, kindly click on the subscribe button to get more mind-blowing videos from us. Don't forget to like and comment your thoughts also. It was the 1930s, and Unit 731 located in Habred was created, which was meant to be a lumber mill. Yep, right. Instead of cutting down trees, they were cutting into humans. Men, women, and children were referred to as marta, or logs. Now, why were they doing all this? Which is not even meant to be a question. Well, aside from fulfilling some sick curiosity, they were trying to advance germ warfare and medical science. They did live dissections, exposure to diseases, and all sorts of torture that would make even horror movie directors like Stanley Kubrick, David Fincher, or Quentin Tarantino cringe. Imagine being deprived of food and water to see how long you'd last, or having your limbs frozen off just to see what happens. That's not science. That's a twisted game of what if. One of the more gruesome parts of this was when women were subjected to forced pregnancies just to see how diseases affected their unborn babies. It is as horrific as it sounds. As the war came to an end and the Soviet army got closer, the Japanese quickly executed the remaining prisoners and bulldozed the facility just to cover up their crimes. But hold up. When the United States found out about the horrors that went down at Unit 731, instead of bringing the perpetrators to justice, they struck a deal. They decided that the data gathered from these atrocities was too valuable to be thrown away. So they got a free pass in exchange for their research. So yeah, next time you think about the length someone will go to for science, just a little reminder, it gets crazier than this. Which brings us to our second wild experiment. Number 2, Project 4.1, Operation Castle. Operation Castle sounds like a theme park. Well, it's not. This little escapade was a series of nuclear tests conducted by the US in the 1950s, a time where the US military decided to test out thermonuclear devices, like the ones used in the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, only this time they cranked it up to 1 trillion. This is where it gets really entertaining. I meant really evil. When they released the bombs, they sent radioactive waves over islands like Uterik, Ronglap, and alien atolls, leaving the people to suffer the effects. One of the survivors, Hisashi Ochi, lived through what you might call the worst workplace accident. What's most interesting is that he stayed alive the longest and witnessed the horrific changes happening to his body. Some say he chose to watch, while others claim he was forced to stay alive just to see it all happen. Back in 1999, he was working at a nuclear fuel conversion company in Japan, and then he and his colleagues made a mistake that no one could come back from. They were trying to make uranium fuel rods, but rushed the job. Next thing you know, his body absorbed 177,000 millisieverts of radiation. That's like 300 years worth of natural radiation in just a few hours. It was definitely not a happy ending for him. Just 83 days of unimaginable suffering before his body finally gave out. So we've had torture and radiation, but these scientists weren't done with their science experiments. Number 3, Guatemalan Syphilis experiment. This experiment took place in the 1940s. People were trying to get their lives back together after World War II, and these scientists thought it was a good idea to inject Guatemalans with syphilis. This experiment was led by Dr. John Cutler, the same guy involved in the Tuskegee experiment. Only that this time, instead of 600 people, he experimented with over 5,000 young Black Americans, including soldiers, sex workers, orphans, and even patients in mental hospitals. One sad and brutal case involved a patient named Berta, who got injected with syphilis in her left arm. A month after this experience, she began to itch like crazy. There were also bumps forming around the part she got injected. She had several lesions on her arms and legs, and her skin looked like it was having a major breakout. Well, more of a massive one because major doesn't seem to do it any justice. Like, that wasn't enough when Dr. Cutler noticed she was about to give up. He made such a wild decision to inject gonorrheal pus from another male subject into both of her eyes, her urethra, and her rectum. And just to be clear, this is not a fiction series. This is based on real life. P.S. If I wasn't a drawing, I would be receiving therapy right now. Talking about events that still haunt me to this day, we have the case of Willowbrook State School. Trigger warning. This story might make you homeschool your child. Willowbrook State School was a school for disabled kids to help provide care and take care of your kids and provide them with the best lie. It was a front for medical experiments and definitely not the kind that involves finding the next cast for X-Men. Nope, it was straight out of a school horror movie. At this point, it seems like these psychopaths come up with new horrific ideas like a group of bored college students. This time around, a certain doctor thought, and it's just a speculation, okay? I am not some mind reader, I wish. Hey, let's inject disabled kids with hepatitis to see if we can cure it. Hepatitis, by the way, is an inflammation of the liver, often caused by a virus, that can lead to severe liver damage or even death. These are just big words for it can kill you. Dr. Saul Krugman and his partner, Dr. Robert W. McCollum, led this full experiment and turned the school into their very own laboratory. They monitored the effect of hepatitis and gamma globulin on over 6,000 intellectually disabled kids who were living in a place that made prison look like a 5-star hotel. They went as far as feeding them the virus. I just puked in my mouth. Not that I have a digestive system. The kids started turning yellow. Not exactly like SpongeBob's though. They had their eyes bulging out of their socket and they looked like they couldn't stomach any food. Well, all this sounds crazy. Let me tell you something crazier. Dr. Krugman justified all this by saying the kids would have gotten hepatitis anyway. He also received the 1983 Albert Lasker Public Service Award for his contribution to medical science. I know. Don't get angry just yet. Wait till you hear about the Pitesti experiment. Number 5, Pitesti experiment. Pitesti Prison is known to be one of the most brutal re-education programs in modern history, which is just a fancy word for pure evil. In 1949, some Christian high schoolers suspected of taking part in the Legionnaires' Rebellion were swept into this new prison with a fancy re-education program. It had a simple purpose of breaking and making them, only that it was meant to break them literally. And I mean, they were subjected to brutal torture, including severe beatings, forced painful positions, water torture, and starvation. They wanted to see how far they could go to turn them into monsters. They turned the prison into a lab experiment where they made prisoners turn on one another. Some of these prisoners were religious, so they decided to punish them religiously by swapping the Holy Communion with human feces and changing the liturgy, which is a very holy statement in the Catholic Church, and to slur words. Apparently, physical abuse wasn't enough. They also tortured them mentally, to the point of insanity. They forced them to denounce their religious faith in the most inhumane way possible. During the first stage of re-education, they were forced to spill out their greatest sins. So some of the prisoners faked it, so they could escape. If only it was that easy. The second stage was betrayal. They had to turn against people who were nice to them, and saying no to all this was a no-no. Some prisoners even had their bodies burned by cigarettes or forced to eat their own vomit after eating their bodily waste. The ones who couldn't endure the physical and mental torture eventually passed away. If there was ever an award for the most cruel and sadistic experiment, would they have taken it home? Number 6, Rhythm Zero. In 1974, Marina Abramović, who was a performance artist, created a social experiment to see what happens when you give the public complete control. She offered her body for the experiment for 6 hours, definitely not like the Mets. She set up a table with 72 objects. It had a rose and some grapes, and some pretty dangerous objects like a scalpel, nails, and wait for it, a loaded gun. Oh, I forgot to add, she wasn't moving. She told the crowd, "Do whatever you want to me. I'm just an object." That did not go so well. At the start, it was all roses and kisses. They handed her flowers and touched her gently. How sweet. Well, not for long. They took it up a notch. They took the scissors and started cutting off her clothes. By the 3rd hour, her clothes were completely gone. And by the 4th hour, people were randomly slicing her skin with blades. Wait, there's more. Someone decided to press a gun to her head and guide her finger to the trigger. Suddenly, the place turned upside down. It turned into a fight between the audience. Some people wanted to protect her, and others wanted to add attempted murder to their evening plans. The insane part of it all was she just stood there until the 6 hours were up. Then she ran like she wasn't just sliced and almost murdered. I know a lot of you are probably thinking, why? Trust me, I am also thinking the same thing. Maria's goal was to see how far people could go with no rules, and she definitely got her answer. Now that's all for the twisted, dark stuff. Just kidding. I wish I wasn't. We have another sick experiment. Mustard gas. During World War II, the US government sponsored some seriously shady experiments, which exposed about 60,000 American soldiers to mustard gas. Among the 9 experiments conducted in the 1940s, scientists decided to see how different races reacted to this toxic gas. Racism with a gallon of evil. They turned military bases and universities into playgrounds for racially based human experimentation. By the way, it was all a secret, meaning that people didn't know they were being used as lab rats and were being exposed to toxic air. The purpose of the experiment will just blow your mind. It was to test gas masks and protective gear. Now, what did this little experiment cause? They ended up with long-term health problems like chronic lung issues and skin cancer. They didn't get the help they needed, and they definitely did not get any compensation for what they went through until the 1990s, when the experiment was exposed. Now we have come to our final experiment, the John Money experiment. Number 8, John Money experiment. Now, this guy named John Money is kind of a big deal in the world of gender theory and the whole trans movement. He came up with a twisted plan. He thought he could rewrite the rules of gender identity, but he did not do it in a nice social experiment kind of way. He got a kid involved. John spends his free time thinking about what makes boys boys and girls girls, which a lot of people at that time did not relate to. He was one of the first people to separate gender from sexuality. He believed gender was a social construct, and he decided to prove it at the expense of a young child named David Reimer. David Reimer was raised as a girl after a botched circumcision that left him without his male private part. John Money had a goal. He believed he could turn David into a girl. Here's where things get disturbing. His methods were like a reality TV show gone wrong. He insisted on hormone treatments and surgeries and documented the family's every move like he was creating a freak show. He completely disregarded how David felt and treated him like some experiment. In the end, David grew up projecting the identity that was forced on him and struggled with depression. Well, that was a ride. If you thought that was the worst humans can go through, think again. Or better still, check out our next video, the worst day to die in every time period.